Richard Dolan is an author and a respected UFO historian. We'll talk with Rich about his books and about his new educational lecture series. Maureen and I will also discuss the recent discovery of organic compounds on Mars, China's plans to grow vegetables in space, and other space and UFO news right now on Spacing Out. Greetings everyone and welcome to Spacing Out. I'm Jason McClellan.
And I'm Maureen Ellsbury. Thanks for joining us.
We'll be talking with UFO historian Richard Dolan later in the show today.
But first, let's talk about what's in the news.
New findings are giving researchers a better understanding of the extreme environments in which life as we know it can exist.
Researchers used drills and heated pipes to drill 60 feet into the Antarctic ice before reaching Lake Vita, a lake that has been isolated for an estimated 2,800 years. The temperature of the water was found to be approximately 8 degrees Fahrenheit, with a saltiness of about 5 to 6 times greater than the average ocean water, which is what keeps Lake Vita's water from freezing.
The water was also found to be mildly acidic and completely depleted of oxygen. Yet, in this harsh environment, samples collected from the lake reveal that a diverse and thriving community of microbes in the brine has managed to survive for millennia.
The Christian Science Monitor describes the brine had very high levels of carbon-based compounds, the building blocks of life. It also possessed high levels of chemicals that generally react with each other, such as nitrous oxide and molecular hydrogen, suggesting they were being regularly replenished, a surprising discovery given how the lake was isolated for a millennia from any obvious external sources of energy to help create them.
Understanding extreme environments where life exists here on Earth helps researchers better understand where life might exist elsewhere in the universe. Peter Doran, one of the researchers who participated in the Lake Vita study, explains, by seeing what the boundaries of life are on Earth, that helps us when we go out and look for examples elsewhere. Similar subsurface lakes exist on alien worlds like the icy moons of Saturn and Jupiter, and researchers hope to one day drill through the ice on those worlds in search of life.
On Earth, where there is water, there is life, and as scientists are discovering, this holds true even in the most extreme environments. And time will tell if the same thing holds true throughout the universe. In the famous words of the fictitious Dr. Ian Malcolm for the movie Jurassic Park, life finds a way.
The detailed findings from Lake Vita were published in the Journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Large amounts of water ice and possible organic compounds were recently discovered on the planet Mercury.
NASA announced on Thursday, November 29th, that data from the Messenger spacecraft indicates there is between 100 billion and 1 trillion metric tons of water ice in permanently shadowed areas near Mercury's poles. Temperatures can reach 800 degrees Fahrenheit on this scorched planet, but in the planet's permanently shadowed regions, temperatures can drop to minus 370 degrees Fahrenheit.
Space.com explains that Messenger's data also indicates that much more frozen water is present in slightly warmer areas on Mercury, buried beneath a strange dark material that acts as an insulator. According to researchers, this dark material is likely a mixture of complex organic compounds, the carbon-containing building blocks of life as we know it. Messenger participating scientist David Page of UCLA explains this organic material may be the same type of organic material that ultimately gave rise to life on Earth.
Researchers think finding life on Mercury is a long shot, but these latest discoveries have astrobiologists paying more attention to our sun's closest neighbor. In a related story, on Tuesday, November 20th, Mars Science Laboratory Curiosity Chief Scientist John Grotzinger told NPR that an upcoming announcement about data from a recently collected soil sample by Curiosity's Sample Analysis at Mars, or SAM instrument, would be one for the history books. This comment fueled speculation about the possible discovery of evidence indicating past or present life on Mars.
NASA announced the latest findings from its Curiosity rover on December 3rd during a press conference at the annual meeting of the American Geophysical Union in San Francisco, California. Explaining the announcement, Space.com describes that Curiosity found evidence of chlorine, sulfur, and water in Mars dirt, studied by its onboard laboratory, as well as organic compounds, chemicals containing carbon, inside its Sample Analysis at Mars instrument.
According to NASA officials, the chlorine is of Martian origin, but it's possible the carbon may be of Earth origin, carried by Curiosity and detected by SAM's high-sensitivity design. Wired.com reports that Paul Mahaffey, SAM's principal investigator, is trying to avoid fueling further speculation. He carefully stated, "We have no definitive detection of Martian organics at this point, but we will keep looking in the diverse environments of Gale Crater."
Commenting on his one for the history book statement, Grotzinger acknowledged, "I've learned that you have to be careful about what you say and even more careful about how you say it. We work at the speed of science. The rest of the world works at the speed of Instagram." China's ambitious space plans show no signs of slowing down. In fact, the country's plan to colonize the moon or Mars seems to be gaining momentum.
Deng Yibing, deputy director of Beijing's China Astronaut Research and Training Center, recently told the Xinhua press agency that an experiment was just conducted on a 300 cubic meter cabin that is capable of providing sustainable supplies of air, water, and food for 2 occupants.
The Xinhua press agency explains that 4 kinds of vegetables are grown, taking in carbon dioxide and providing oxygen for the 2 people living inside the cabin. The cabin's occupants could also harvest the fresh vegetables for meals.
The hope for these special greenhouse cabins is that they can be used as extraterrestrial bases on the Moon or Mars. China aims to have people on the Moon living in fully operational space stations by the end of the decade. The recent story about UFOs over Denver refuses to go away. For the details about the story, visit our website openminds.tv or watch the previous episode of Spacing Out. But very briefly, for those of you who aren't familiar with this story, KDVR Fox 31 in Denver was sent a video showing UFOs over the city. Reporters went to the location where the video was shot and managed to capture their own UFO video. Even after consulting with aviation experts, the station could not identify the UFOs.
And as we reported last week, KDVR Fox 31 continued investigating the mysterious object by asking a local entomologist, Marianne Hamilton, to analyze the station's video. Hamilton watched the video and commented, "This is a toughie. I've never seen anything like this." According to KDVR Fox 31, she concluded, "I do not believe it's an insect. The shape is inconsistent with an insect." But Hamilton was apparently basing her opinion on limited and potentially inaccurate information.
Astronomer Phil Plait with Slate Magazine contacted Hamilton to ask her about her not insects conclusion. She told Plait that she was only shown a few clips of the object and was told the objects were far away from the camera. She explained, "I did the best I could with what was shown to me."
Plait, like many others, is astonished that these UFOs over Denver have received so much media attention. He's confident the objects in question are no longer UFOs, but simply insects. You might remember that Jason and I discussed the likelihood of bugs as a possible identification for these UFOs on the November 16th episode of Spacing Out. Plait recently stated, "And yes, I know UFO means unidentified flying object, and since no one could identify them, these are by definition UFOs. Except for they aren't, they're insects."
Man, Maureen, I am tired of hearing about Denver UFOs.
I mean, it's been identified in my mind since the day one.
Sure.
But,
as we
again,
like to point out, you're not going to ever be able to convince everybody, and we don't need to convince everybody. We pointed to the evidence that suggests very likely these are bugs. And, you know, it's good that they had the entomologist and actually spoke to an entomologist as opposed to an aviation expert to try to identify these objects. But
yeah, they were
pushing
covering the bases.
an agenda.
Yeah, they were covering their base, and I think a few other people have remarked even that they think that it had a little bit to do with ratings, because the story was going so well that they wanted to get as much fuel to it as they could.
For sure.
And I'm really glad that Phil Plait contacted the entomologist and
I am too.
Got that detail that, well, she wasn't given all of the pieces of the puzzle there. No one can say for sure that they were far away from the camera. Most likely they weren't.
Well, as much as I would like to say we'll never talk about the story again, we probably will, unfortunately, because it won't go away. But speaking of ratings, as we mentioned last week, NASA is the king of trying to hype people up and get ratings, and they did the same thing with this Mars announcement about Curiosity's soil sample analysis. They really hyped it up, and then I think intentionally tried to generate more hype by downplaying the hype, saying, "Oh, don't worry, it's not really going to be earth-shattering like we said it was going to be." And I mean, it was pretty exciting news that they announced, but as they said, they're trying to play it safe here and say, well, we probably found organics, but they're probably not from Mars. We don't know yet. We'll keep you posted.
Well, there's a great little cartoon making the rounds that Jason Major of Lights in the Dark posted, and it basically is like how NASA announcements go. Super exciting, how they should go. And they had 2 check boxes, and one says aliens and one says not aliens. But this is still exciting, and I think that a lot of people are like, well, if they didn't find little green men running around Mars, you know, who cares? Well, it's still a very big step in Curiosity's mission.
And every step they make, everything they're discovering is pointing more and more to the likelihood that they are going to find definitive proof that there is or was life on Mars. And look, at even more exciting, to me, it's more exciting just because it's so bizarre and I don't think anybody thought it would happen, and that's Mercury. It's finding so much water on Mercury and hints again at organic material. And on this scorched planet. How could anything be there? It's
the
much
closest
water.
planet to Earth, I mean, to Sun.
Lots of water.
Yeah.
So, and as we point out, and again, I mean, this is good news because it's mainstream science. And in mainstream search for extraterrestrial life, they're looking for life as we know it. And what do they look for? They look for water. So anytime we find water, and large amounts of water at that, that's a good sign. And like we said, astrobiologists are now looking somewhere they really, you know, was pretty low on the list. Mercury, why would you look there? But
yeah, I had somebody ask me, well, I don't understand why they want to colonize Mercury. I was like, no, nobody's talking about colonization on Mercury.
Yeah.
I don't want to go there. You don't. We
Yeah.
have much better chances for the moon or Mars at this point.
Right. And I think China might be the first one to wherever it is. They're really pushing hard.
It's great. The space race is like going all over the place. And again, like I said, I think that it'd be nice if everyone worked together and we could get to those goals a lot faster. But these little self-sustainable cabins for 2 people, an interesting thing I thought in that was it said self-sustainable for 2 people, but for up to how long can this work out, you know?
As far as we know, this was their first test with these little cabins. But the interesting thing about this, and this is the case with a lot of technology that's now again coming out in this new space race, is technology that's been researched and came out really back in the Soviet era, you know, so many decades ago. The Soviets were testing this stuff back in the 60s, these same sort of sustainable cabins. So that's where this is all coming from. NASA's even explored this technology. So it's stuff that's been there before, but we finally see countries and private space organizations actually utilizing it, and in the case of SpaceX and some others, finally building some new technology and, you know, getting over or under the red tape and just finally using it, getting it into space, making the plans happen, and it's going to happen so fast.
Yeah,
we talk about it every week. It's surprising how many stories we have to talk about space colonization and how rapidly it is coming.
I think we'll see it in our lifetime, and sooner than we think.
Well, it's going to happen, and like in the case of China, I mean, we're talking, you know, 10 years or so.
They said within the decade.
Yeah, so it'll be exciting to see. I'm excited to watch and see what happens, and I think the United States gets a little pissed and feels like China's showing them up, but you know, that's their own fault. They need to.
Who cares? Whoever's first, I don't care.
Yeah.
But I also like the fact that it's happening so quickly and that so many people are signing up for these one-way tickets to live on another planet. It's not completely shocking. It's just, you got to remember, that's it.
Right.
You're going to be bored.
And I think with a lot of this coming into, again, mainstream science, it's good to have the exposure there. People are getting interested in space again and getting excited about the search for extraterrestrial life. It's becoming a mainstream topic. Mainstream science is covering it, you know, in their own way. They're doing their own approach and, you know, little steps. I think it's great to see it happening. And like I said, I think with all of these private companies and all the extra and new activity happening in space, we're going to see a lot more of it.
Yeah, I definitely think we will, and we'll find a lot more exciting discoveries within the next couple of years. But that is all the geeky space news this week.
Lots of space news. It's now time for our interview with Richard Dolan.
Rich is a UFO historian who has written several books about UFOs and spent a considerable amount of time researching the subject. And although he's continuing to write about UFOs, he's now talking about UFOs in the academic setting.
Let's jump into the interview to hear all about it. Well, it's great to see you again, Rich. Thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Appreciate it, Jason, and hi, Maureen.
Hi.
Well, Rich, you are certainly one of my most favorite people researching UFOs. I've always found your approach very digestible, very approachable for common people, and you've taken an more academic approach to looking at the UFO subject. And you've done a great job with your series of books, UFO and the National Security State. And if you wouldn't mind, would you kind of briefly explain to us what those books are and the approach you've taken with dealing with the subject?
Yes, and thank you, by the way, Jason. I've been writing about UFOs. I've been researching UFOs for almost 20 years, and my primary works are historical. I've written 2 volumes of history, which are called UFOs and the National Security State. They're part of a projected trilogy. So these first 2 volumes are each 500-600 pages. They're big, fat books. I do like to think that they're well written, though, and really what the attempt is to take a reader just through a straightforward, well argued history of the UFO phenomenon in the modern era. Like, here's what happened, then here's what happened, then here's what happened, so that if you want to get a good foundation in the field, my hope is that these books would serve that purpose. It's not just a book of sightings, though. That's much more than that. I try to study the politics. That is asking questions like, is there an attitude about the UFO phenomenon that we get from governments, especially the U.S. government? Is there a cover-up? If so, how does that cover-up possibly function? So that's a big part of it. And then the other part of the book has always been the research, how we researchers understand this phenomenon, how that's changed over the years. Think back to the 1940s and 50s and 60s and think to today, and certainly researchers are at a very different place in our conception of what we're dealing with. And that's also part of my research. So I try to weave the whole thing together. And that's really the 2 volumes of UFOs and the national security state. And as I said, I've had a lot of people asking me, well, when's the 3rd volume coming out? There is going to be a 3rd volume. I have that. That's been fully researched for a long time. But I've had a couple of interim projects that have intervened between then and now.
That always seems to happen. Another book you actually released lately covers a topic that I think is always really hot in the community, which is disclosure. But one thing I like about what you did is, with your co-author Bryce Zabel, who we've had on the show as well, is you covered what would happen after disclosure.
Exactly. Yeah, no one ever did that.
No, exactly. And so I think that was a really great perspective. And so the book is AD After Disclosure. And what was your basis for your idea of what was going to happen?
Well, that was a topic that when I look back over the years, I see in retrospect that I was lurching toward. I was inching toward it year after year, even as long ago as 10 years ago. When I look back at some of my old lectures, the idea of disclosure was always one that kept popping up. And I just on my own started thinking about this idea of, well, what are the problems of having an actual disclosure? Because it's not all going to be beer and Skittles, like a lot of people were saying. A lot of people in our community would say, oh, yeah, disclosure is like this magic bullet. We must have disclosure, and that will solve our problems. Now, for myself, I believe in disclosure. I believe in openness, and I believe in the end of secrecy on UFOs. But I don't believe it's going to be something that will solve all of our problems. And I really wanted to think through pragmatically. A couple of years ago, I started talking with Bryce Zabel, who, as a TV producer, wanted to option my 2 volumes of history for TV treatment. That's actually how we started talking. Those conversations mutated into what became AD After Disclosure. I realized he was interested in largely the same topics that I was interested in. We were very compatible, and we thought, you know what? We can do a really interesting book that gets people thinking. Not a book that will answer every question, but a book that hopefully will ask some good questions to get people thinking about the pragmatic implications of the transformation of our society that the end of UFO secrecy would have. Because after we finished writing this book, what we realized, and it was a great adventure to write this book, we realized that it's not hard to see why there's secrecy on UFOs, because ending that secrecy really would change everything. Everything, not just our belief in religion, which you hear everyone talking about. Oh my God, religion. Well, that's one aspect of it, yeah. But there's finance, there's economics, there's really fundamental infrastructure issues that are going on here that would be affected. Then there's the political fallout, which would be a mess, and on and on and on. And then the cultural changes and so forth. So really, we think that disclosure is the game changer of our lifetime. And I've often enjoyed saying that it's a paradox in a sense that ending disclosure is impossible, but it's also inevitable. And I believe it's both. It's impossible just because on the surface, those people who I believe have the secret have no incentive ever for giving it up. And yet they're not the only game in town. And history continues to move forward. And I think that secret will end. And I do believe that people living today, most of us living today, will see that happen. So that's AD after disclosure, and that was a great project. And then I just finished the draft of another book, which has subsumed most of my energy for the last year, and that exists now as a lecture series and will exist in a few months as a book. So that's a whole new thing.
You got yeah, you're not kidding. You got a lot of little projects that creep up here.
They never stop.
Yeah. Well,
but this is a good one. This is a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, I was approached by an online university called the International Metaphysical University, IMU.
I'm glad you brought this up because I really want to hear about this.
Oh, well, this is a great experience for me so far. It's really worked out well. A lady named Kelly Wary, who is one of the people helping to run it. It's all like an alternative type of university. If you go to a mainstream university, try to get paranormal or alternative or other types of subject matter like that, well, good luck. You really won't find them. This is that's what they call it, metaphysical. So it's not accredited, although they're working on that. They are working to get accreditation. And they have a ufology department. The problem with the ufology department is that they had no ufology courses. So they needed to start it up. Kelly learned about me and asked if I would create an introduction to ufology course for this program. And I said, well, that's interesting. What would it involve? And essentially, it involved preparing 12 one-hour lectures on however I wanted to do this. I said, really? So I decided to undertake it because I thought this is a good project. This is a project that would allow me really to think through the entire subject of UFOs and ufology in as fresh a way as possible, without anyone influencing me. I could just think, what would be my 12 themes, and how would I devise a ufology program around it? So actually, I jumped at this chance, and preparing the 12 lectures. And the thing is, like, a 1-hour lecture is roughly going to give you about 9,000 words. And that's a chapter of a book. And I thought, if I do 12 of these, that's a book. I'm just going to do this, and I'll adapt it for a book. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I figured, why not? But it's been a great project. It took me about a year to do it all. But it's done. The lecture series is done, and we actually now have students who have signed up for it, and they seem to be excited. So that's that whole aspect. And for that, this is crazy for me, but I'm the instructor, so I'm the teacher. I'm teaching the course, which means that I have students who ask me questions, and I grade what they do and all of that stuff. We'll see how that goes.
Well, I watched, honestly, I know you have the introduction to the course, little video on your YouTube, and looks like you're brave because you're covering a lot of topics in 12 hours of video. I mean, I know.
Yeah, it's actually a little more than 12 hours because each of these lectures turns out they're on average 70, 75 minutes. Most of them are more than the 60 minutes. But no, you're right. It's trying to, I mean, the thing about something like this is, clearly, this is not going to be the final word in ufology. I've intended it to be a good first word. That's how I think about it. And I'm happy with the themes that I've covered. It covers, I mean, my background, my training is in history, so there's a lot of history, but it's not all history. There's a lot of philosophical and investigative things, like just the whole idea of what are UFOs? How is it that people can easily be fooled by UFOs? We know it's a truism that 90% of UFO sightings are of mundane objects, and I think that's more or less the case. So I think it's important that we remind ourselves that every time you see some crazy-ass light in the sky, it's not necessarily an ET. But then, there are other themes as well. One whole lecture, which will be a chapter in the new book, just deals with ufology itself. Like, how is it that we understood this topic back in earlier decades? How do we understand it now? What are the problems facing responsible ufology today in an age of YouTube and Facebook and copy and paste journalism, in which many of us really will do our investigations right from our computer screen? There's good things about that, and there's problems with that. I'm trying to look ahead to deal with issues. You know, what does it mean in ufology that we now know that there are so many technologies that are man-made that really literally can convince a person that they're looking at a flying saucer, whereas 50, 60 years ago, that was not as realistic a claim. So we have a lot of other things that we've got to become familiar with in ufology for the 21st century that I'm trying to bring up and discuss. And then there's the whole science. I have a lecture dedicated to the science of UFOs, whether it's propulsion, you know, what makes these objects do the things they seem to do, to energy. That is there a different source of energy that is behind all of this, and how might that be relevant for our world? To considerations of space-time itself, talking about Miguel Alcubierre's, you know, warp theory and all the things related to that, to things, multiverse concepts and multi-dimension ideas, to the whole concept of consciousness itself. Whereas when you look at the UFO phenomenon long enough, it becomes evident, obvious, that there are no shortage of claims again and again and again, claims that I believe of people who've had some kind of telepathic connection with these other beings. So what does that mean? What does it mean that they can get into our heads and that there's some kind of connection there? Well, I don't have every answer to this, but my contention is that all of these types of notions are essential for us to understand ufology properly moving forward, and that's all part of the science. And there's a lecture that deals with disclosure and the whole moving into the future, as well as contact and abduction. That takes up quite a bit of time in here and trying to understand what does that possibly mean, as well as all of the history. And then I do spend some time focusing on a concept that I've been working for a few years, which I call a breakaway civilization, really what I would call the deep aspects of the cover-up itself. How does that all function? So all of these things, to me, are part of what constitute ufology for today. Not ufology in 1980 or 1990, which the problem that I have when I think about UFOs in our popular culture today is that it just seems so old-fashioned in a way. It's like 1955. You know, are we dealing with men from another planet who are here to be our space brothers? Or are we dealing with evil reptoids that are here to take us? Maybe some of both of that. But it just seems to me that that the field needs a bit of a facelift. And that's a big part of what I was trying to do with this lecture series, which is now available with the International Metaphysical University. I'm really excited that I did it. The book version of this will be out. I wanted it to be out actually by now. Everything just takes longer than I expect and hope, but it will be out in early 2013. And I don't even know if I have a full title for it. I think I'm calling it Rethinking ET UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. I believe that's going to be the title, but even that might change.
So,
but
are these courses
yeah.
available free of charge, or is there tuition involved?
There is tuition involved.
Okay. So
it's a couple $100 to sign up, and I actually don't remember the exact amount, but it's like taking a college course. Basically.
Well, I like the idea of that. I like the approach, and I also like your approach of making it relevant. You know, bringing it to a 21st century mind. I think that's a good call.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And what I discovered is they actually asked another UFO researcher before Kelly knew who I was. She asked another very well-known researcher. I won't mention his name. He's a great guy, but he really couldn't do it. He didn't have. I don't think he had the time or the energy. And when I look back over really what I did for this, I really feel that I was extremely well suited to do this. I think that I was perfectly suited to create this exact course. I don't believe that this exists anywhere else in any university in the world. In fact, I'm sure that it does not. I am quite certain that this course is absolutely unique, that there is nothing like it, and there's nothing nearly halfway as cool as this in any university course anywhere in the world. I think this is the coolest university class you could possibly take.
Honestly, I think that I wouldn't be surprised to see more courses like this flood into public universities because the topic is becoming a lot more mainstream and more sort of digestible to people, that I could see that happening in the near future, but
It's, time keeps changing, and it's very easy for older people to think, oh yeah, nothing's ever going to change. But new generations come up all the time, and I'm lucky because I get to see it all the time. I have two teenagers. I'm reminded of that every day, and I talk to folks in their teens and 20s all the time. And I agree. I think that there's a sea change in let's call it consciousness among the youth of the world. And I do believe, I agree with you, I think that they are vastly more open to this reality than their parents and grandparents have been. So I think you're right. I think, well, the pressure will be on the university system to change it. The problem is that university systems are often the last to change. They really are very conservative. So we'll see how that works out. But anyway, we're a university. We're doing it, and we're going to make it happen and make it available.
Well, we've definitely been seeing, it's very gradual, but seeing more younger people at UFO conferences, which is a huge transition from what the norm has always been at conferences. We're seeing that more and more. Actually, speaking of conferences, you're going to be joining us at the International UFO Congress here in Phoenix in February, right?
I'm looking forward to that.
All right, and I want to know, what are you going to be speaking about? I've seen you speak so many times, but I've got to hear what you're going to be speaking about this year.
I'll be doing some variation of this, what we've just been discussing here. So I actually haven't, I have a couple of variations of lectures I've already been developing based on, pardon me, on this new lecture series and book. What I think I'll probably end up doing is focusing on the implications of science, actually. This is something I haven't really discussed, but scientific implications of ufology and why it is as important as it is. Probably not exclusively on that, but I'm finding that in the last few months that this has become a very strong interest of mine. What I find when I do lectures on this topic is my lectures always evolve. So they don't really completely become absolutely new from year to year, but they really do evolve. So like each year, I find that I'll have like a new major theme that I like to work. A couple of years ago, it was the secret space program and breakaway civilization. Those are still very important to me. But I think this year I really want to explore the implications of science in ufology and what it means. I feel like I'm not a trained scientist, but I feel qualified and knowledgeable enough that I could discuss it at a reasonable level so that we can get a handle on why this is important.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to having you out again. And before we let you go, I want to plug, you also do Truth Out There Radio, and how can people listen to that?
Oh, thank you. I love doing that show. It's my 3-hour tap dance before the world every Saturday night Eastern time, 8 to 11 Eastern. Well, you can go to the globalradioalliance.com. That's what hosts it. I have it linked from my site also. It's a nice little banner I got there. So if you forget Global Radio Alliance, if you just Google me, Richard Dolan, go to my website, you'll see a little banner that clicks.
Which is keyholepublishing.com.
That's right.
Awesome.
Exactly.
All right, Rich, well, it's been fun.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll talk again soon, and really looking forward to seeing you at the Congress. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, same here. Thank you guys for having me on. It was
all right, Rich. Take care.
Take care.
That is all for this episode of Spacing Out. Be sure to visit openminds.tv for all the latest news.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back again next week with another episode. I'm Maureen Ellsbury.
And I'm Jason McClellan. We will see you in the future.